Okay, we might make a start then and welcome you all to our latest, our third, and probably final for the moment webinar on the summer of sustainability. This is the name I've given our series on how to do good and legal sustainability communication for the games industry. So we're talking about the Green Claims Directive today. And we'll be giving an overview of what it aims to do and what it regulates, what it covers, what sorts of things are prohibited, what sort of things are just, new processes we're going to have to deal with. And then I'll look at a case study or three case studies of different types of green claims that are pretty typical and that often come up in the games industry around first is the idea of being carbon neutral, carbon neutrality. So we'll look at how that interfaces with the Green Claims Directive and its requirements. We'll look at eco modes, which are becoming more common after the Microsoft, Epic, Ubisoft, big team effort from the sustainability team last year to find ways to save energy, in games. And then the last one is like awareness raising and fundraising approaches in games. And then we'll hear a little bit at the end from Tommi from Rovio, who's going to give us a little bit of his perspective on some of these lessons that they've learned at Rovio around green communications, both internal comms and external, and just how to the hard-won lessons from being at the coalface, I suppose. So once again, a short disclaimer that this is not legal advice. I'm not a lawyer, but I have spent a lot of time in the last couple of weeks with the Green Claims Directive and its kind of latest version, and it is an area of kind of evolving or developing policy. The EU is still it's set its position, but it is, settling on the final details of it still. So keep that in mind. And yes, this webinar is being recorded. So if you feel like it, leave your cameras off. And we'll have a little bit of time, I think, for questions at the end if you want to ask any more. So why the Green Claims Directive? Why does it exist? Well, the EU did a study or two studies in 2014 and then again in 2020 on just the kinds of things that companies were claiming about their products. And it found because the EU believes basically that consumers want to make environmentally conscious choices, but there are things in the way of enabling that. And they are things like the fact that half of all green claims are vague, misleading, or don't have any kind of, evidence to back them up. You just can't tell whether they're true or not. 40% of claims haven't got the evidence that you would need to make your own assessment of it. Half of all green labels offer a weak or non-existent verification process. They might be self-certifying. So, companies can just be like, oh yeah, we think we're up to that standard. So the result of the study is that it saw greenwashing is serious and widespread. It's through all industries. It's not any one particular area. It's like ubiquitous, for better or for worse. And consumers are left with really low trust in green claims about particular products. And labels as well have a real kind of weakness to them. And we can see this played out in the number of ESG risk events that have been happening over the last couple of years. So this is a map of, or a graph of the number of ESG risks, greenwashing risks across the world. And the number of them that have happened in Europe has climbed to nearly 1,000 in 2022. And I think if you look at like last year, once this gets updated in a couple of months, it'll be even higher. So that's things like IKEA being basically called out for using illegal logging in its supply chain and, taking a real big reputational hit as a result. H&M having labels that basically, 96% of them were not actually holding up to scrutiny. And, people sort of, again, the result is like, well, I can't trust the label. Ryanair was banned from making particular CO2 claims in the UK based on, treating them in a particular way and trying to position themselves as more clean than they are. In Germany, the carbon neutral company logo was banned through Climate Partner. So they were operating this scheme using carbon credits. And that was the scheme that Gamescom used to claim its carbon neutral status. So those companies, they kind of had to walk back. They suffer a bit of like embarrassment. And in some of the worst cases, even, might face court cases and things. So greenwashing is a problem, and the EU is like, okay, we're going to solve it with the Green Claims Directive. We're going to regulate this area that has been a bit of a Wild West. So it's in progress, but it's like it's reaching its kind of final shape. So what does it actually regulate? Well, the Green Claims Directive regulates all voluntary environmental claims. And an environmental claim is any message or representation, whether that's a word spoken, it could be in an ad, it could be in voiceover, it could be on text on the website, it could be a picture, anything like that. It's in or around the product, the company name, in the context of a commercial product that implies that it's better, has no impact or positive impact, or is less damaging than other products that maybe don't have that sort of, green aura around them. And so, yeah, so it's fairly broad ranging. It also covers environmental labels and adds to existing requirements. So the existing, which one is it? I forget which one it is, but it's one of these. I think it was the Empowering Green Consumers Directive, basically banned labels based on self-certification. And now the Green Claims Directive adds further requirements around what it takes to be a green label, an eco label. So it needs transparency and credibility requirements around governance, how the organization that upholds the label actually operates, what assessment criteria it uses and applies to make its assessments, what complaint resolution processes it has in place, what the non-compliance procedures are like. And basically every label, if you want to be an eco label, has to go through a validation process after the Green Claims Directive. So quite wide ranging. And it introduces new obligations. So it introduces minimum requirements on substantiation around environmental claims and around communicating them. And they are also now subject to third-party verification with a tiny little carve-out that, I won't get into, but basically 99% of all green claims have to be verified from the start of the Green Claims Directive being enforced. They need to be a third party, needs to go through all the details of them, look at the materials that are the basis for that assessment and tick it off and say, yes, okay, I agree with the sustainability claim being made here. Here is your certificate of conformity. It also adds obligations to the process of like comparative claims. So if you claim better performance than something else or lower impact than other products, you just need to use equivalent data. It sets a fair playing field for comparisons. You need to use equivalent data, equivalent info, cover the same stages of the process, use the same assumptions, and state your baselines between, two products. So if you say my game has this much CO2 in it or is lower impact than the average game, yeah, you need to adhere to these very high standards from now on. So what are the types of green claims that we might hear? Well, specifically, these are the ones that it names in the directive: environmentally friendly, eco-friendly, green, nature's friend, carbon neutral, gentle on the environment, energy efficient, biodegradable, and low impact. And so it just gives these as examples. These are not the only ones. It's like anything in this type. And what you'll notice about all of them, or most of them anyway, is that they're quite fuzzy terms that just sort of, they're associated with sustainability. They maybe don't have a very clear sense of like, okay, well, Yeah, there's room for interpretation. Very, very soon, the Green Claims Directive is going to require proof and verification for any sorts of claims like this. So I think they're going to change, and we're going to stop seeing things like some of these terms on the left, and we'll start seeing other ones come through. So I think that's a positive thing. There's no more nebulous vibes-based claims that are going to be made about products. You know, they've got to be verified. They've got to be proven that they are actually associated with sustainability and in a particular way. And I think it's a positive development. And enforcement of this starts after adoption. So I think the final version, the final wording is planned for next year, early next year at some point, and then there'll be some time for member states to fully transpose it, and then it becomes just kind of law everywhere. And all of a sudden, the playing field changes, and a lot of these sorts of wishy-washy claims go away. So the kind of concrete claims that we might want to make around our sustainable products, our games, and what we've done to ensure their sustainability are now going to need to be verified according to new standards, and they need to be third-party verified. So the details of how this process will work is still kind of to be worked out, but the standards that they're going to be applying are they're set. So it's things like you need to rely on scientific evidence and state-of-the-art technical knowledge. You need to demonstrate the significance of your claimed impacts. So if you say, okay, it's using less energy, you need to actually, show that there's a specific amount. You need to talk about the aspects, the significance of the aspects and performance of it across the life cycle of the product. It needs to take into account um, the significant aspects that might impact that performance, right? So it can't just be like shifting the emissions to another part of the part of the system. It actually has to be genuine, preventing waste or preventing emissions. It needs to also demonstrate whether the claim's accurate for the whole of the product or only a part of it, or maybe for a part of the life cycle of the product or for all of it. And it needs to demonstrate that the claim's not just basically what you have to do as a minimum standard required by law. It's got to go above and beyond. It's got to also have information on whether the product performs better than is common practice. So as standards improve, the level of ambition should ratchet up. And it needs to identify whether a positive achievement makes something worse elsewhere, right? So if you save energy here, are you just shifting it into the cloud and, making it worse for someone else, in your supply chain? It's yeah, quite a high bar. And it needs to require it requires that greenhouse gas offsets or credits get reported separately, so that they're not like lumped in as a kind of one net figure. They need to be reported as their own thing. So one last thing before we move on to the case studies. The Unfair Commercial Practices Directive defines the types of actions which are considered misleading. For companies to take, basically. And the Green Claims Directive now amends the Unfair Commercial Practices Directive to include making an environmental claim related to future environmental performance. If you don't have clear, objective, verifiable commitments and targets and an independent monitoring system. So this applies to any sort of net zero claim that hasn't been verified by, an independent organization like the Science Based Target Initiative. It covers net zero, carbon neutral, any sort of lower impact kind of claims, anything about, your kind of plans that aren't, part of some sort of audited, independently monitored approach. And this applies to everyone, right? So the Unfair Commercial Practices Directive doesn't have any exemptions for the size of the business. So if you're a small single person company, you need to adhere to these standards, right? You can't do unfair commercial practices, even as a small business. So that's quite a wide-ranging impact, I think. And I haven't seen that talked about very much in the discussion. So Where does this get us? It gets us a level playing field. It's a little bit of a scorched earth tactic in that a lot of claims just are completely wiped out. They are not going to be permissible anymore. So all traders, including the smallest companies, are within that scope of the Unfair Commercial Practices Directive. There are some kind of exemptions for certain types of claims for the smallest companies. And there are plans, the EU has plans for small and medium enterprises to get some relief from the high standard potentially of some verification systems. But yeah, basically it means if anyone buys a game based on an unverified environmental claim, they can seek redress. That's the new like level of standard. That's the new risk that everyone's kind of going to face. So let's now look at a couple of green claims and how they stack up against this new standard. So we'll look at carbon neutrality claims, we'll look at eco modes, and then we'll look at the idea of raising awareness or fundraising for sustainability. So the first one, carbon neutral. This is a claim that you have balanced out your environmental emissions with credits from somewhere else. And the EU specifically calls out climate-related claims as particularly prone to being unclear or ambiguous, lots of little details that can kind of, make you look better than you actually are, or that makes your impact look better than it is. And so let's see whether like a carbon neutral claim can pass these new requirements. So requirement number one for recognized scientific evidence and state-of-the-art technical knowledge. Well, I think the barrier there, or the bar to clear, the difficulty of it is extremely high because there's really low agreement around the quality of carbon credits and their standards. There's a really big, really open question at the moment around certification schemes and their actual production of additional reductions in carbon rather than or like all these old credits that are being turned out as like, actually you didn't prevent anything, you just paid a whole bunch of money to someone to fence a forest and all of the trees just got cut down somewhere else. So it's a really high standard there. Taking an LCA approach for your assessment, well, that's harder than I think the CSRD and ESRS reporting will be. It's like just a different way of approaching the problem. And yeah, the significance of impacts. You need to be able to demonstrate that your carbon neutrality, well, it's actual carbon credits really means carbon in what sort of way you've avoided or taken out of the atmosphere. And it really only focuses on one aspect of the sustainability challenge, right? So it doesn't talk about things like biodiversity loss, the use of water resources, protection of natural environments, things like that. All of that stuff is kind of, it doesn't fall within the sort of carbon neutrality thing. So it needs to demonstrate if it's a claim about whole or in part, is it your whole supply chain or your whole value chain that's carbon neutral or just a part of it? Again, a lot of work will be required to go into that. Maybe less of a difficulty than some of the other areas, but a lot of effort to get that, and just to be able to say you're carbon neutral too, which is sort of, yeah, it's going to end up with a case where you go, all right, well, is it really worth going through all the trouble of going for this certification? Are there better, easier other claims that we can make instead? Yeah. So that's the first one. The second one is eco modes, and I think they're this is quite an illustrative example because they're quite different. So an eco mode has started to pop up in more and more games in the last 18 months, basically since Microsoft's sustainability team, Xbox sustainability team, along with Ubisoft, Epic, 343 Industries, a couple of others, realized that, well, we want to save energy consumption in our players. We want to like save them money, but we also want to just like save power when we can. And so what they found was on menus, when players have been idle for a minute, when they're just sitting on a menu screen, you don't need more than 60 frames per second maybe, and you don't need 4K resolution. So it's about scaling that back. And so there's a white paper that Epic put out. This is just a screenshot on the right here with the amount of savings that they found during this period where if people are sitting idle, it just reduces a few of the demands on the hardware itself and uses less power. So I think the eco mode is a kind of a green claim, right? So if you say there's an eco mode in your game, I think that's going to need to be verified. So can it pass the same stringent requirements? Well, you need recognized scientific evidence and state-of-the-art technical knowledge. Yeah, I think the difficulty there is pretty low. There are direct measurements that Microsoft and the other games companies took of hardware telemetry, looking at the difference when they change from 4K to 1080p or whatever in the menu mode. And there was that graph we could see on the previous one of like, okay, this is the average power usage of devices in this mode over this period. So yeah, there's real evidence behind it. Does it take an LCA approach? Well, yeah, this might be a little bit trickier because you need to measure against the other non-eco modes, but I suspect that's possible, just a bit of work. The impacts, yeah, I think you can pretty easily claim that, yeah, the impacts are real. They're limited to a very specific part of the product, that use phase of the game, and only when they're sitting on menus. So it's even nicher than that. But yeah, that keeps the scope nice and small that you can verify it easier. Yeah, and so you can see the rest of these. Yeah, there's positive achievements. You might need to do an LCA model to demonstrate there aren't any other unintended consequences. It doesn't use any offsets though, which means you just, yeah, don't even have to talk about them. And there's a clear benefit to it, right? It goes above and beyond, what's the minimum requirement. So I think eco modes stand a really good chance of becoming something that could be very quickly, very easily verified by third parties. And the last one, our last case study, is green awareness and fundraising. And this is a little bit of a trickier one because yeah, I think there's a lot of interest in using games to raise awareness on climate issues and particularly to raise funds for environmental causes. And I think that's great. We can go back to 2022 and Hunter Bulkeley's GDC talk about how they planted 500,000 trees via their game Terra Genesis, things like that. So there's a lot of interest in it. The Green Game Jam has a lot of participants. And I don't think these are going away, and I don't think it's the intention of the EU to regulate out this sort of activity, but I think the communications are going to have to be managed really, really carefully. Is a green game a type of claim that's regulated under the Green Claims Directive? Is planting X number of trees a green claim? I mean, I think that it probably is. I just don't see any way that it's not covered by this, right? So let's see, how tricky will it be to get these sorts of claims verified? Whether it's about raising awareness or fundraising. Well, recognized evidence and state-of-the-art knowledge. The level of evidence about the impact of awareness, like it's there, and it's not like it doesn't have any sort of impact, but I think it's a high bar. I think it's going to be quite difficult to make that claim, and it might discourage some people from trying it. You got to take an LCA approach. Well, if you're talking about raising awareness in players kind of outside your LCA, basically, you're talking about players doing things in their lives beyond playing games, then like that's kind of difficult as well. It's quite a high bar. Again, not impossible, but I think it's difficult. You need to be able to say the significance of the impact. So fundraising there, that might be really simple actually, because you can say, all right, well, we raised this much money and planted this many trees. Awareness, again, is kind of difficult. Yeah, you might need to have a monitoring system in place to kind of measure it. Needs to demonstrate, is it about the whole game or part of the game? Again, it's sort of a bit ambiguous. Raising awareness is about players. It's not about the product so much. Is it better than required by law? Yes, I don't think you're required to make games about climate change, but it certainly doesn't hurt. And yeah, the other two, it's hard to model the LCA around players. And yeah, lack of standards around offsets and things. Again, coming back to that issue of the integrity of carbon credits. So yeah, it's a little bit tricky for them, I think, for those kinds of claims around making green games. But the upside to this new regime is that, well, games are not fast-moving consumer goods. That's not like a packet of chips. People don't look at the shelf on the supermarket and go, "Oh, I'll buy that one because it's more green." But we do know that gamers really know and care about the people that make their games. And so I think that's where it becomes a real advantage to the brand of your organization to be able to say, yes, all our games have an eco mode. Um, all of our games have XYZ sustainability features in them. And yeah, I think there will be certain parts of the gaming audience that will really care about that stuff. But it does come with a cost. This new verification requirement, the EU has modeled some of its kind of assessments of what it might cost. So for a really simple claim, like, okay, we only used paper in our game boxes, that might only be 500 euros. For a more complicated one that's around product environmental footprints, so maybe the eco mode might be in here. They think it might be thousands of euros, it's a pretty high bar. So I guess it's important for us to be able to, as an industry, come up with these sort of processes, that can just kind of be rolled out over and over to reduce the verification costs. So I think eco modes actually probably will sit a little bit lower on the spectrum than this. And then at the very high end, if you want to claim that covers your environmental footprint of your entire organization, it could be as much as 50,000 euros. If there aren't any sector-specific rules. This is like the very, very top end. Luckily for us, the SGA is about trying to make sector-specific rules for the games industry. So I think that's another thing that we can really kind of help out with there. Bringing the cost down for these verifications by having the process be determined and backed up by research and having an easy submission process, basically. But at the end of the day, you get a certificate at the end of this process. You get peace of mind. No one else can claim they are green, anymore. It's only the people that get verified can talk and make these sorts of claims. And that could be, yeah, really quite powerful. And I think there's quite a bit of potential to go beyond just the sort of the basic eco mode thing. We can come up with other approaches. So the last thing I want to mention, though, is that the Green Claims Directive only regulates voluntary environmental claims. There's nothing, I think, stopping you from claiming the contents of your mandatory disclosures. So the ESRS, your CSRD disclosures, which, third-party auditing happens to them, I think you can rightfully make claims around them. You can state what the results are. So things like year-on-year absolute emissions reductions or intensity reductions. These are the metrics, some of the metrics built into the ESRS. You can talk about reductions in value chain, if they're measured reductions. And your transition plan for aligning with net zero, right? These are parts of the requirements for certain parts of these things, and other regulated EU programs like the EMAS, Environmental or Eco Management and Audit Scheme, which CD Projekt Red, I think, still is the only European games developer that I know of. I looked through the database, I couldn't find any others. That has this sort of certification. And so, yeah, if it's a regulated thing, you can make claims around that. You can say, hey, we have this monitoring scheme in place. We have this in our emissions reporting. So yeah, I just wanted to bring in now Tommi from Rovio to talk a little bit about his experience with green comms and sustainability communication, both internally and externally. So thanks, Tommi. Give us a little intro for those who might not know you, and then yeah, can't wait to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. So, hi everyone. My name is Tommi Lappalainen. I've been doing sustainability things at Rovio for the past 10 years. So that's a quite long stint. And nowadays we actually have a team of 3 working in sustainability, and I'm leading our climate and environment work alongside other this kind of more general sustainability duties like reporting and following the regulation as such. So I'm here today, like what Ben mentioned, like I'm here to give a masterclass on how to do greenwashing without getting caught. So of course, I'm just joking. I'm here to just quickly share some learnings in the field of green claims and general sustainability comes, what we have learned. And to keep it brief, I've prepared this kind of 3 key points, what I had in mind. I could easily do a list of 10 or 20 things, what you need to do, but like these are my top choice for the starters. So my first point is transparency and honesty. Like it's really important to be proud of what you've done or what you are about to be doing, but it's good to make sure that you always include the challenges, possible obstacles, and the limitations. So you are telling the true story. And for example, like if you say like we are net zero in 2030, you need to also present a robust roadmap on things that need to happen within the next 5 years to become net zero. Otherwise, it sounds and feels like just an empty promise with a wish that someone or something solves your problems over time. And this is quite common also that you see companies throwing in there that, hey, we want to be net zero in 2030 and presenting nothing. So it gives you quite many questions. And it's good to be confident, but not overconfident. So if you are not sure and if you don't recognize all the impacts, you might easily end up being this kind of accidental greenwasher. So this kind of accidental greenwashing might easily happen if we just don't have enough knowledge on these things. And you're throwing green claims that, hey, this is probably good enough. And that's not a good way to work. So as Ben presented, there are quite many tricky things you need to do to have your green claims backed up. And that's really important, especially in the future when the act is in full force. And my second point then is the impact scale. I think that it's really, really important to always focus on impact scale. So let's say you're a studio of 10 people and your player base is 10 million people. Then making your office paper-free doesn't make much of a difference in the big picture where other purchase goods and services and use of sold products are the hotspots for your emissions. It's good to remember that every good action is of course counted and it's good, but it's good to not make a big deal of small symbolic gestures. This is like really important, and quite many times you see companies losing their focus on the kind of scale of things. And my last and third point is when talking about communications, it's good to think about your audience as well. Generally speaking, whether it's an internal or external audience, it's always good to think about your audience and also their level of understanding. Climate discussions and focusing on green claims directive can become very technical very quickly. So you might lose or confuse your audience with your everyday jargon if you have the knowledge. And so transforming things to tangible comparisons, like let's say the emissions saved with this action is similar to reducing 100 transatlantic flights or something like that, makes your talk much more comprehensible and gives your audience the possibility to evaluate the scale of things. Of course, you need to have the kind of figures ready and everything you do to make it like more publicly appealing. There's a caveat of that you throw in false green claims, but good to keep the kind of scale in mind and make it as comprehensible as possible for the everyday layman. And kind of lastly, I want to mention that one thing to remember is that whatever EU regulations or global regulations say, many times your kind of common sense will guide you to make the correct decisions. If you don't know enough, don't say it. If you know enough, have all the challenges, have all the limitations of your kind of claim open and public. And good to remember also that the regulation is just levels the playground for all and tries to limit the possibilities of throwing false claims, which some companies may have been doing in the past, but this is a good attempt to kind of have those false claims removed and level the playground for all. I think those are the key points what I had in mind.
Thanks, Tommi. So if I could summarize them again, it was transparency and honesty and being clear about your limitations. Knowing your audience and what you're communicating to your audience. And what was your second one again?
I think it was like about the impact scale. So
Impact
that you,
scale, of course.
yeah, so
Yeah.
you recognize what kind of action is actually meaningful and what is more like a symbolic gesture.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Which
Wonderful.
have their place, like especially like if your employees are not climate scientists, it's good to also kind of have those symbolic actions in place, like you are reducing food waste at your office and something like that. It makes people think, and it's tangible for everyday people. But like it doesn't probably make much of a difference in the big picture. But maybe it comes fruitful that they start thinking about it. That hey, what do we do about the climate? Is this impactful or not?
And do you find that the team in Rovio, when you include them in your kind of climate actions and plans, do they respond well to that? Do they appreciate that being included?
Yeah, I think that like the employees are kind of our biggest motivators in a way that many times we find our employees asking really kind of also tough questions like what's Rovio doing about the climate? What are we doing about the climate crisis? What's our role to play in this and what have we done? I'm not saying that we have done a perfect job. I'm that kind of person that I have my nose on my books and like communication is not my kind of strongest area, but yeah, employees are a big motivation and kind of big resource also for us to kind of keep us motivated to work towards these things.
Fantastic. Thanks, Tommi. Really appreciate your insight.
Thanks.
So just to kind of wrap up, I wanted to finish with a little checklist that I've prepared for you to go through when you get to the point of making a green claim or wanting to make a claim. I want you to start by thinking, is it a specific claim or is it a generic one? Are we actually saying something concretely, or are we just trying to, are we saying we're doing something, which might be great, but is it specific? Is it targeted? And I think that goes to that question of scale too. If it's if it is a something that you are doing with a big scale with big potential for impact, then I think you can be much more specific than if it's just a little bit ambiguous or ambivalent. If it's generic, revise it and make it specific. Try and think about what are the things that you're acting on or working on improving, and make it consciously. Avoid sleepwalking into making risky green claims and staking a reputation on, I don't know, unclear data or unproven assumptions. It's just not worth it, I think. Very, very quickly, I think we're going to see a real drop off in those sort of fuzzy claims. Is your claim about the whole of a product or part of it, whole game, part of the game, the whole organization or part of your organization? Know the limits of what your claim is about and understand the life cycle that your game moves through. Is it a live service game? Where are the emissions in the value chain? Is it all upstream in supply? Is it all downstream in users? We need to have a clear picture of that. When it's about your organization, know what the reporting requirements are, and is it up to the ESRS standards? Can you base your claim on your mandatory reporting? If you're already doing it, like why go to the effort of making something additional if you're already showing great work in your ESRS? Is your claim a comparative one? Are you saying it's better than an alternative? If so, yeah, are you using the same data? Are you using the same methods, assumptions, covering the same parts of the game? Yeah, and I think that's about it. So we've got a little bit of time for questions. I hope that's been useful. If anyone has any burning questions, either for me or for Tommi, even, I think, yeah, we'd be more than happy to take some. It's a fairly small crowd today, though, so understand if not. Feel free to either type in the chat or just unmute and say hi.
Actually, I have a question to Tommi. So when it comes to green communications, is it something what your management team is also thinking about? Like, is it something which your management like was concerned with, or is it something that you raised from your sustainability team department as something you should take care of?
It's like a mix of both. Like we have that kind of lucky situation that my boss, Heini Kai, who's our chief sustainability officer, who's been working in that role for, let's say, something like past 2 years or so, is also a member of leadership team. So quite high in the rank of the company. So in that sense, Heini is representing us in the kind of top management of the company. So in that sense, they have the kind of open dialogue about sustainability things through Heini when they have their leadership team meetings and that kind of stuff. But it's also like a mix of things. It may be so that something comes from the leadership towards us that hey, what's our stance on this and what should we do about this and should we kind of focus on this kind of things, whether it's general sustainability or green claims or something like that. And then something comes proactively from us that hey, we have recognized this kind of opportunity and or this kind of a problem, that what should we do about this. So it's kind of an open dialogue. So there's no kind of strong force that we would have this kind of a committee on top management that would run these things, or that it would be purely just us.
When it comes to like the reputation of like Rovio, is this something where like does the green communications, is it something like on a high priority, or would you say there are other reputational risks which are like way more important, or like how is it something you could give like a number or I don't know, like a insight?
Yeah, the kind of ranking of like what are the priorities within our sustainability things or so. Of course, the kind of, if we think about the reputation, our games and kind of business performance, and that's something that in mobile games and in gaming industry, of course, that drives the kind of action that if you are really successful in the gaming industry, then you have probably kind of a good reputation if you don't have screwed up everything else in your company. But I would say that probably in terms of sustainability thinking, I think that I would say that the kind of people questions like what's the employee well-being, how we treat our employees, how we treat people in our value chain, how we treat our freelancers and that kind of stuff, that's usually the highest ranking and the kind of top priority in sustainability things. But then the kind of green things, climate things and those kind of things come quite like quickly after those things. But I would say that the people things are the most prominent and the kind of highest in the priority, and those are then followed by the other things.
Yeah, and I guess both people and the planet, and then even like governance and that idea of having your leadership being invested in the decisions around sustainability. Those are requirements of the ESRS, and the disclosures around that are going to, I think, reveal some interesting things about certain organizational structures and patterns in the next couple of years. So
yeah, it's funny in a way that it changes the game a bit because like quite many gaming companies can be a bit black box when it comes to sustainability. That they might not be disclosing anything. We've been publicly listed companies, so before nowadays not anymore, but we still generate sustainability report and continued providing those reports. So you have some insights on what we've been doing and how things have been developing on whether it's people or climate or governance. But now it becomes public for everyone. So it's a kind of a new challenge for those companies that haven't been doing reporting.
cool. Well, if there are no other questions, maybe I'll just point you to a couple of other resources as well. Oh, yeah.
Actually have one. Emil Rosendahl from Metaplay here. Thank you for the great talk. Really interesting stuff.
Thanks.
So I'm thinking about like, because we're like at Metaplay, we're doing like a backend service for game studios. So we do have like, when it comes to like emissions for us, we do have obviously internal stuff like travels, hardware, office space and stuff like that. But besides that, our main like kind of carbon emission source is our servers, but they're currently hosted by AWS, which is kind of out of our reach. Like we don't have our own service in that way. So like, what are your thoughts on that? Like, what can we do in that sense?
That's a big question. I guess the first answer is that well, the SGA, we want to enable the entire games industry to basically go to a lot of those data center providers, some of the biggest companies, and be like, okay, we have these requirements. It's part of our reporting or our, sustainable targets and goals. Can you give us better data? I know in particular AWS is not like the top tier in terms of disclosures, and I think there's work that they can be doing that we can give them an incentive to speed up or be more transparent about. Yeah, I mean, this is the challenge facing just about the entire games industry. Is like, how do we find ways to influence our entire value chain or parts of the important parts of a value chain? So it's a big question. I don't think I have an ability to answer tonight, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I understand if you don't have a straight answer for it, but yeah, thanks.
Maybe
if I
Tommi,
throw in a quick call to action for you, reach out to your account director at AWS and ask a call that could we discuss about sustainability things and the energy consumption, and ask them, is there anything you could do? Because there's certain differences between like what geographical areas you are placing your servers and your workloads towards, and there are differences. So there might be something that they might be able to recognize for you.
Yeah.
So that's the first step.
Yeah, thanks.
But I feel you. It's as Ben said, it's pretty much the same for every games company, that you don't own too much yourself, whether it's like producing software at any forms, is that nobody owns the server space anymore.
Yeah, sure. I really like what you talked about, like the eco modes as well, as that could actually be like a tangible thing that we would be able to do also for our customers.
And I think that there's real potential to develop a similar sort of process for maybe the utilization of data centers, and to identify like optimization. Like obviously so there's this organization called the Green Software Foundation, and they have big, huge members like Intel, Microsoft, all these big steering companies. And one of the things that they have discovered at the moment is that the number one thing that ends up kind of driving or correlating with sustainability is actually cost, particularly around servers. So if you do things to reduce your cost in data center usage, then you almost inevitably always end up using less energy, which uses less emissions. And so, yeah, there are places where we can be like, okay, where are the levers? We can identify the levers for action. And yeah, sometimes they save us money as well. So another upside. Yeah, so just a couple of little things before we finish up. So there's a link in here to a really nice up-to-date summary of what the EU is thinking about the Green Claims Directive, if you want to go into the details about that, where it's kind of up to in terms of its legislative progress. If you want to make green claims about, like as Tommi said, make them relevant to your audience, the US EPA has a greenhouse gas equivalencies calculator, which lets you take, say, your figures for your server usage or your office heating and cooling electricity, and then translate that figure into something that makes sense to people, like 1,000 cars off the road or something, So that's pretty useful. And then we also have our Scope 3 briefing paper out at the moment, open for comments, open for any sort of suggestions that people have, which it's just our attempt to outline the challenge that we have in developing a standard method for thoroughly measuring the greenhouse gas emissions of the entire games value chain, and what the sort of challenges we face in each of the Scope 3 categories. So that's the broader, not just our own energy use, but everything in the value chain, everything we have sort of influence over that has emissions. So yeah, take a look at those. We'll send around like links to the slides if anyone wants to watch them afterwards. And yeah, I'll just say thank you everyone for coming, and I appreciate the making the effort to come on out. Especially thank you to Tommi for taking some time to talk to us this morning. And yeah, we'll see you around.